He cleaned the blackboard every night for 30 years. No one noticed, until a student discovered that the old janitor was quietly rewriting a kind of mathematics only a few minds on Earth had ever touched. Princeton's winter doesn't begin with snow. It starts with wind, cold, sharp, and steady. By January, even the chalk on the blackboards feels brittle. It was 1:10 in the morning. Lecture Hall C5 was dark, silent. The same room where some of the world's most advanced mathematics was taught now sat empty, except for the faint buzzing of overhead lights. And then the door creaked open. An old man stepped in, rolling a metal cart. He wore an olive work jacket and moved slowly, carefully, with a cloth and a piece of white chalk in one hand. His name was Ellis Ward. He was the night janitor, always had been. He spoke little, never interrupted anyone. Students passed him in the halls like he was part of the furniture. But that night, something was different. Jacob Klein, a third-year PhD student, had just left a birthday party. Something was tugging at his thoughts, something he couldn't explain. He turned back and walked into C5. He needed a book he had left behind, an old text from Grothendieck's seminars. As the light flickered on, Jacob paused. Something was on the blackboard. Not from class, not from any textbook. It was a diagram. 3 points connected by arrows, and below it, a handwritten note that read, "This map sends one structure into another, and there is a reverse path that preserves its essential shape." Jacob walked closer. This wasn't a student's joke. This was a quiet piece of mathematics. Something deep. Something strange. Something that hinted at abstract algebra and category theory. Fields so advanced they often confuse even full professors. And someone had written it in plain chalk, like it was just obvious. Jacob turned around, and then he heard it. A small scraping sound. An old man at the back of the room was putting away a mop. Ellis. Jacob looked at him, stunned. "Did you write this?" Ellis said nothing. He walked slowly to the board and began wiping it clean, one long stroke at a time. The diagram disappeared. The next morning, Jacob told his friends in the math department, "I think someone is using the blackboard after class, drawing ideas that don't match anything from our lectures." One student laughed out loud. "You mean the janitor? What's next? Einstein's ghost?" Another added, "Maybe he's just doodling shapes while he cleans." They laughed. Jacob didn't. You don't just doodle this kind of idea. It's not random. It's structured. It points to deeper logic, almost like dual thinking. No one believed him. That night, Jacob came back again. He waited in the dark behind the podium. At 1:10, right on schedule, Ellis entered. This time, Jacob didn't move. He watched. Ellis picked up a piece of chalk, and slowly, carefully, he drew another diagram. 4 shapes connected by lines. Then, underneath, he wrote, "One path moves forward. A second brings it back. A third goes deeper. They are all linked, not by numbers, but by balance." Jacob's breath caught. This was a picture of mathematical duality, a rare concept where ideas don't just go one way. They go forward, backward, and around, keeping their shape. It was the kind of structure Grothendieck used when exploring the foundations of space, logic, and algebraic geometry. But Ellis hadn't copied it. He was thinking it through, like a man walking in the dark, drawing his own map as he goes. Jacob stepped forward. "Sir, where did you learn to write that?" Ellis looked up, surprised but calm. "I didn't learn it. I just try to see which paths make sense. If one shape leads to another, then something must come back. Otherwise, the picture doesn't hold. He smiled, a little shy. I never knew the right words for it. The next day, Jacob met with his professor, Dr. Berman. He's just the janitor, Berman said, folding his hands. He's been here since before I arrived. A quiet man. Jacob explained the diagrams, the symmetry, the balance. Berman didn't laugh. Bring me a photo next time. I want to see it with my own eyes. That evening, Jacob rushed back to C5 to photograph the drawing, but it was gone. Not erased, scrubbed clean, no chalk dust, no smudge. The board was spotless. He asked the security guard, "Did Mr. Ward clean this already?" "No," the guard said. "Professor Bram came in early, said he had a lecture and wanted the board cleared." Jacob froze. Professor Bram, a rising star in the department. Sharp, brilliant, protective of his research. Bram once told the class, "Math belongs to those who publish it, not those who dream it." Had Bram seen the diagram? Had he erased it, to hide it, to claim it? Jacob left the building that night, his mind full. There was a man, a janitor, drawing mathematics that only a few in the world could understand, and someone was trying to make sure no one ever saw it. A man who loves math but has no blackboard is like a blind man finding his way by the scent of the wind. Ellis Ward, 3 a.m., basement washroom, hall C5. Since that strange night, Jacob Klein couldn't focus on anything else. Abstract algebra, derived categories, spectral sequences. All of it faded into the background behind the image of an old janitor drawing diagrams that only a few mathematicians in the world could understand. The way he placed each arrow, the 1-second pause before connecting two objects, the softness in the chalk lines. It wasn't copying. It was instinct. It was what Jacob had only seen in the eyes of Professor Berman, in the notes of Grothendieck, and once in his own grandmother, who could solve integrals in her head but never finished high school. Jacob had to know more. And so, the following night, he did something he'd never done before. He followed Mr. Ellis Ward home. It was cold. Leaves scraped across the sidewalk. Ellis walked slowly across campus, carrying an old canvas bag and wearing the same jacket he always wore. Jacob kept his distance. The janitor passed the old math building, then turned down a side path near the student dormitories. He stopped at a low, narrow structure. Not a dorm room, not an apartment. It looked like a storage room, repurposed into something livable. Ellis unlocked the door with a key, stepped inside, and left it slightly open. Jacob hesitated. Then he knocked. 3 soft taps. No answer at first. Then the door creaked wider. Ellis looked tired. There was chalk dust still on his cheek. "You followed me?" he asked. Not angry. Just tired. Jacob took off his glasses. I'm sorry. I had to know. How do you know those things? The diagrams, the arrows, the way you describe adjoint structures? I've only learned that after years of study. Ellis looked at him for a long moment. Then, without a word, he opened the door fully. "If you've come this far, come in. But if you're from the university's office, I don't drink coffee with management." The room was tiny. A desk, a metal cot, walls covered in old maps, some curling at the edges. One black and white photo caught Jacob's eye. A young soldier in uniform, smiling, holding a copy of Introduction to Topology by James Munkres. Under the desk, dozens of notebooks were tied together with rubber bands. No titles, no labels, just years of quiet thought. Jacob opened one. Inside were page after page of handwritten diagrams. No formal proofs, no textbook definitions. Just structure, direction, function, and quiet commentary in the margins. If a left adjoint exists, the inverse limit must hold in the topos. Perhaps this was why Grothendieck rejected Bourbaki in the end. Jacob looked up. Where did you learn all of this? Ellis didn't answer right away. He reached into a folder and pulled out a faded letter. It was yellowed, delicate. Dated 1964. The seal read, Department of Mathematics, Rutgers University. They accepted me that year, Ellis said, voice low. First in my town to get a university letter. I studied for 2 semesters. Then the draft letter came. Jacob blinked. Vietnam? Ellis nodded. I came home in 1969. My parents were gone. My scholarship, gone. The university said the place was no longer held. I worked in the library, then on night crews. Eventually, I just stayed. This was the climax, not of action but of pain. A young man once full of promise, pulled from the path of knowledge by war, then forgotten. Jacob's voice trembled. But how could you write those structures? The kind of dual thinking you showed. Most PhDs don't even try. Ellis smiled softly. I don't write them. I feel them. If a function only moves forward, there has to be something that brings it back. Otherwise, the shape is broken. I just draw what makes it hold. He paused. You think math is equations. To me, it's a map. And if I'm still alive, I'm still looking for the way. Then came the knock. 3 loud bangs. Mr. Ward, campus security. Someone reported you're being harassed. Jacob stood quickly. Ellis walked to the door and opened it. A tall guard stood there, arms crossed. You a student? He asked Jacob. You're not allowed in staff quarters after hours. Ellis stepped between them. He's not a problem, he's a friend. He's asking about old math books. The guard narrowed his eyes. Just this once. If I see someone here again, I have to write it up. Jacob left, heart pounding. He stopped by the library on his way back. He wanted to look again at the rare copies of Grothendieck's seminars, especially the 4th volume, the one about topos and sites. He typed the request into the system, but the screen blinked with a strange message. Volume 4, unavailable, checked out, status, reserved, no borrower listed. He asked the librarian, an older woman with a soft voice, Is there a way to see who has it? She frowned. That copy is marked for senior researchers only. Been locked in special access for months. Jacob's eyes narrowed. Someone didn't want that book read. Not by students, not by Ellis. That night, Jacob returned to Ellis's room. He knocked gently. Ellis opened the door slowly. Jacob handed him a slip of paper, a sketch of the diagram from memory. Underneath, he had written, If this is a map, then you're the only one drawing it without a compass. Ellis smiled, and for the first time he said something that had no math in it. Thank you for not letting me disappear. There are people who can't write equations, but they can see the shape of truth. That's what Professor Berman said during a quiet faculty meeting at Princeton's mathematics department in the winter of 1991. He said it while holding a faded hand-drawn diagram, copied by a janitor named Ellis Ward. The drawing showed 3 abstract shapes connected by arrows. It wasn't labeled using standard symbols like F or G. Instead, Ellis had written a note in blue ink. If a map cannot be fully reversed, there should still be a hidden shadow, a map that exists without existing. Jacob Klein, the PhD student who brought it to him, said softly, "I think he's talking about a phantom map in model theory." A phantom map is a concept from homological algebra. It's a type of mathematical connection that doesn't exist in a clear or direct form, but its effects can still be observed through other structures. You can't point to it, but you can feel it. Even Alexander Grothendieck had only begun exploring it before he stopped his work on the subject. Professor Berman looked up from the diagram. "Jacob, I don't know who this man is, but this isn't imitation. This is pure intuition. And I haven't seen that in 2 decades of doing math." The next morning, Berman called a private meeting with 3 senior professors. On the board, he redrew Ellis's diagram, adding formal notation but keeping the structure untouched. One of the older faculty, Professor Murrow, stood up and pointed at a faint broken arrow. "Look here. He didn't use a solid line. He made it faint, like he was saying this map isn't really there, but its effect is. That's the very definition of a phantom map." Then came the tension. Professor Lang, a cautious academic, crossed his arms. Or maybe he copied it from somewhere. Maybe he read it in a book and redrew it. Jacob pushed back. He doesn't have a computer. He doesn't even have a research library card. He doesn't read French, and most of the Grothendieck texts are still untranslated. Lang didn't look convinced. "So if we publish this and give him credit, we're putting a janitor's name next to career mathematicians. Are we ready for that?" He paused. He may be right, but is he qualified? While that question stirred arguments inside the department, something darker was happening outside the room. Professor Bram, the youngest and most ambitious of the faculty, had been working quietly on a paper. His topic? Non-deterministic mappings in homotopy theory. Almost the exact same subject as Ellis's diagrams. Bram had a source. A student named Nathan, who had once pretended to learn from Ellis, had already given Bram a copy of the diagram Ellis drew. That night, Bram went into the faculty copy room, scanned the drawing, and inserted a cleaned-up version into his own research paper. He changed a few labels, reworded a few lines. Then, in the footnotes, he wrote, "Diagram reconstructed from internal analysis, extending Grothendieck's early models." No mention of Ellis. No mention of Jacob. No mention of the janitor who first drew it in chalk. The next day, during a graduate seminar, a student leaned toward Jacob and whispered, "Did you hear? Bram is submitting a paper about phantom maps. Sounds close to yours." Jacob left immediately and walked to Bram's office. "You're publishing a paper on phantom maps?" Jacob asked. "Yes," Bram said, calm, cold. "You know this comes from Ellis. I'm working on that with him." Bram didn't flinch. "You're seriously suggesting a janitor should be cited in a journal of abstract algebra?" "I'm saying the idea is his." Bram stared at him. "I've been working on this since Zurich. If he drew something similar, that's a coincidence. And besides, the blackboard was clean. You have no proof." "You wiped that board," Jacob said. "You erased what you saw." "Don't let your emotions interfere with real research," Bram said. "Academic journals don't publish stories about chalk drawings from old men." Jacob walked out in silence. This was no longer about a diagram. It was a battle, not between 2 mathematicians, but between 2 worlds. One world had titles, degrees, conferences. The other had silence, instinct, and a man who had lived with math the way others live with grief, quietly and without asking for recognition. That night, Jacob returned to Ellis's small room and showed him the revised version of the diagram, the one Bram planned to publish. Ellis looked it over. Then he said simply, "He used the right tools, but he followed the wrong path." Jacob asked, "Do you want to fight back?" Ellis shook his head. "No. I never drew this to win anything. I just wanted someone to draw with me. If your paper gets published, put my name at the very end, like a small corner of the map. It doesn't need to be in the center." The next morning, Jacob returned to Lecture Hall C5. He picked up a piece of chalk and wrote a single line on the board. "True knowledge doesn't require a professor's chair, only someone willing to sit long enough in the dark." Jacob Klein had been pacing outside Ellis Ward's small dormitory room for nearly 10 minutes, trying to find the right words. That morning, Professor Berman had given him the green light. They had secured a quiet, invitation-only seminar at the university. Just 5 researchers, people deeply familiar with category theory, homotopy, and algebraic structures. They had agreed to gather not just to talk about diagrams, but to meet the man who had drawn them. And so now Jacob stood at Ellis's door, preparing to extend an invitation that could change everything. He knocked. The door creaked open. Ellis appeared in his usual worn sweater, a smudge of chalk still on his hand. "Jacob," he said. "Evening." Jacob took a breath. "Ellis, there's a private seminar tonight. Professor Berman has gathered a small group, just 5 senior researchers. We'll be discussing your diagrams. They want you to come, no pressure to speak, just to be there, to hear what they're seeing in your work." Ellis didn't answer right away. His eyes dropped. His fingers closed slowly around the doorknob. "They want me there?" he asked quietly. "Yes," Jacob said. "Just to listen, if nothing more." Ellis stood silently, then nodded once. "All right, but just to listen." That night they walked together to a quiet conference room. No banners, no stage. Just a circle of chairs, one blackboard, and a printed version of Ellis's diagram pinned to the wall. Professor Berman greeted Ellis with sincere respect, offering him a cup of tea, a chair at the circle, and no title. Just his name, Ellis Ward. The others introduced themselves one by one. No one asked about credentials. They spoke softly. They asked Ellis if he'd like to say anything. He shook his head gently. "I just drew what made sense to me," he said. And then the room fell into a calm discussion. Questions were posed with care. "What made you draw this structure the way you did?" "How do you visualize reversal in maps that don't quite exist?" "Did this emerge gradually or all at once?" Ellis only responded in short phrases. It felt like there was something missing from the usual path, like there should be a return, something that brings it back quietly. When the seminar ended, no one applauded, but every hand reached out to shake his. Ellis nodded politely and left. On the walk back, Jacob whispered, "I think you just taught 5 senior researchers how to see something they'd forgotten." Ellis smiled faintly, but said nothing. The next morning, Ellis was already leaning against the wall in the hallway when Jacob arrived. His eyes were fixed on the courtyard. "You okay?" Jacob asked. Ellis pulled a yellowed paper from his coat pocket. A letter. Jacob unfolded it and read. It was dated 1975. A rejection letter from the Princeton Graduate School of Mathematics. "Dear Mr. Ellis Ward," it read, "we regret to inform you that your academic history does not meet our requirements for advanced study. While your military service is noted, your lack of formal credentials prevents further consideration." Jacob looked up. Ellis stared ahead. "They didn't even ask what I had been studying," he said softly. "I tried. Came back from the war. applied with everything I had. But they said no, said I didn't belong. That quiet seminar the night before had stirred something deeper than pride. It reopened a wound that never fully closed. Recognition, however kind, had arrived decades late and brought old shame with it. The shame deepened as whispers began to spread across the department. An email leaked, circulating quietly among faculty. It came from Professor Bram. The message read, "I believe this janitor may simply be piecing together fragments from old texts. The phantom diagram may not be original. We need to be careful about giving credit before verifying authenticity." That same afternoon, Bram approached two junior professors and shared the same doubts in person. This could be an assembly job. Someone sees a few bits from Grothendieck's old seminar volumes and tries to recreate the rest. It's charming, yes, but it's not scholarship. One of the professors nodded hesitantly. Still, Bram, the drawings show real insight. Bram's reply was crisp. Insight is not the same as invention. Word of this spread quickly. A few faculty repeated it at lunch. Did you hear? Apparently the janitor might just be copying Grothendieck. Bram says it's nothing new. The damage was subtle, but effective. Doubt began to cloud the admiration Ellis had briefly received. Jacob tried to stop it. He approached Bram directly. "Why are you doing this?" Bram looked up from his desk. "I'm protecting the discipline." Jacob frowned. "Or are you protecting your own paper?" Bram smiled, not denying it. "Don't be naive. This is research. Ideas come from ideas, but only scholars publish. That's the line." Later that night, Jacob returned to Lecture Hall C5. He wanted to review the diagram again, check every detail against Ellis's original. But something didn't match. One of the arrows, specifically the backward arrow connecting the third object back to the first, was altered. In Ellis's original version, that arrow was thick, centered, a visual emphasis. In this new copy, printed for the seminar slides and later embedded in Bram's own draft, the arrow had become faint, thin, partial, almost erased. Jacob knew the meaning had changed. The structure had gone from suggesting a return to implying only a one-way path. Bram had edited the drawing, not for clarity, but for control. Without the return arrow, the diagram became conventional, less provocative. The phantom map, once the center, now looked like a mistake. Jacob emailed Professor Berman immediately. "The diagram Bram submitted has been altered. The core idea is being downplayed. I believe he's reshaping the narrative." That evening, Jacob met Ellis again. He showed him the changed image. Ellis stared at it a long time. He pointed to the missing line. "That arrow," he said, "is the one that says, 'Something still connects us, even if we can't see it directly.' That was the whole point." Jacob asked, "Do you want to respond? To confront this?" Ellis shook his head. "No. Let him have the center if he wants. I never wanted that stage. I just wanted the diagram to live." Jacob stood beside him, then said, "We'll fix it. Not for the spotlight, just to keep the truth from fading." Ellis nodded once, then put my name last, small, tucked away, like a corner of the board. The next morning, Jacob and Professor Berman met to finalize the corrected diagram. The original structure, Ellis's version, was restored. The phantom map arrow returned. Ellis's name was added at the bottom, not bolded, not centered, but there, not erased. When they finished, Berman leaned back and said, "Sometimes the most important lines are the ones almost erased." Ellis Ward had always taught in silence. Chalk on board, dust in the air. No one listening, no one watching. But now, after weeks of quiet diagrams and dangerous whispers, someone had finally asked to learn from him, not by accident, not by curiosity, but by choice. One Sunday morning, Jacob knocked on Ellis's door holding 2 notebooks, 3 pieces of chalk, and a thermos of warm coffee. Ellis opened the door slowly. "It's my turn to learn," Jacob said, smiling. "I want you to teach me, once a week. No expectations, just teach me what you see." Ellis hesitated. "I'm no teacher." Jacob shrugged. "Neither am I a good student." Ellis looked down at the thermos. "Is that coffee?" Jacob nodded. Ellis stepped aside. "Then let's see what comes of it." That morning marked the beginning of something unexpected. Every Sunday, Jacob came with questions and left with diagrams. But Ellis never explained things the way professors did. He didn't begin with definitions. He began with shapes. "A space that folds into itself must allow something to return," he would say, drawing 2 arrows that never touched but still circled back. "You call this a functor. I call it memory." Jacob would write down what he could. Sometimes he didn't understand until days later. But that wasn't the point. The point was that Ellis was drawing from somewhere older than textbooks and deeper than terminology. One day, Ellis drew a 3-point system. "This one," he said, "remembers what the others forget. It is a quiet witness." Jacob stared at it and whispered, "That's a limit." Ellis smiled. "If you say so." Word slowly spread that Jacob was studying with the janitor. Some laughed, some rolled their eyes, others listened. One of them was Nathan. Nathan was a sharp graduate student, brilliant, ambitious, and entirely loyal to Professor Bram. When Bram learned that Jacob was receiving weekly instruction from Ellis, he didn't need to ask Nathan to investigate. Nathan offered. "I'll sit in," he said. "I'll learn what I can." He appeared the next Sunday with clean paper and perfect posture. "I heard you've been drawing functors," he said politely. "Mind if I join?" Ellis looked at Jacob. Jacob hesitated, then nodded. That day, Ellis drew a system of 5 arrows. "Here," he said. "If the outer maps agree, something in the center must stabilize. I don't know what to call it. I just know it can't move unless everything else does." Nathan raised his hand. "But if you haven't defined what a limit is, how can you say the system stabilizes? Aren't you just guessing?" Ellis didn't flinch. "I'm describing what I see. If the name doesn't match, change the name, not the shape." Nathan nodded, smiled, and wrote everything down, every diagram, every phrase, not to learn, but to document. Over the next few sessions, Nathan returned again and again, always respectful, always writing. But slowly, his tone sharpened. "If you don't define your categories, how do we know your functors are continuous? If your arrows aren't morphisms, how do you prove they compose? Is this just a picture, or is it mathematics?" Ellis never got angry. He simply answered softly, "A map doesn't need a passport to exist. It only needs to show the way." But Jacob began to worry. He noticed Nathan staying late, asking to photograph Ellis's notebooks. Ellis declined, gently. "These pages are old. They're for memory, not for press." Then, one Thursday evening, the worst happened. Ellis left his bag in Lecture Hall C5 after their session. It held one of his earliest notebooks, yellowed, delicate, written in 1978. Jacob went back to retrieve it. But when he opened the room, the bag was gone. He searched everywhere. Nothing. That night, Nathan didn't show up, nor the next day, nor the one after. On Monday morning, Professor Bram submitted a new supplement to his upcoming journal article. It contained a detailed diagram, nearly identical to one Ellis had drawn just a week prior. Same 5-point system, same returning loop. But it was labeled under Bram's own framework. Ellis's phrases had been polished, his language stripped away, no mention of Ellis, no mention of Jacob. Jacob confronted Bram directly. "You took his notebook." Bram smiled without blinking. "What notebook?" "You sent Nathan." Bram leaned back. "If someone leaves ideas in an open room, are they still theirs? You know what the world values. Proof, formalism, titles, not chalk dust on crumbling paper." Jacob stepped back, stunned. "You're stealing thought." Bram shrugged. "I'm preserving it, in the language people understand." That night, Jacob returned to Ellis with a heavy heart. He told him everything: the missing notebook, the diagrams, Bram's submission. Ellis listened, silent. Then he looked at Jacob and said, "I never wrote them to own them. I drew them to remember." Jacob sat beside him. "But that doesn't mean they're his." Ellis shook his head. "Then draw them again, from scratch. You saw them. You understand now. They live in you, too." Jacob stayed until dawn, and when the sun rose over Princeton's winter campus, the two of them sat quietly at the board in C5, chalk in hand, one drawing, two hands. No applause, just a teacher who never asked to teach, and a student who never planned to stay, and something between them that could not be stolen. It began with an envelope, hand-delivered, unsigned, and sealed with a crimson Princeton crest. Inside was a note, brief and cold. "Meeting called tonight. Hall C, 11 p.m. Topic: authorship and academic integrity." Jacob knew instantly what it meant. The diagrams, the paper, Ellis and Bram. That night, the hallway outside Lecture Hall C was quiet, but the voices inside were anything but. 12 faculty members sat around a long wooden table. Most wore wool coats and carried thermoses of late-night coffee. At the head sat Professor Berman, flanked by 2 senior members of the mathematics department, Dr. Lang and Dr. Sinha. On the blackboard behind them, someone had redrawn Ellis's diagram. 3 arrows pointing inward, one looping quietly back. It looked like nothing and everything all at once. Professor Berman stood. "Let me be clear," he said. "This is not a disciplinary meeting. This is an academic one. What we discuss here has consequences, for publication, for authorship, and for how we treat discovery outside the bounds of formal scholarship." He pointed to the diagram. This came from Ellis Ward, a night janitor. He's been drawing structures, by hand, without notation, that correspond with known but incomplete segments of advanced model theory. Specifically, phantom mappings, and a recursive topos structure not found in current literature. A murmur rippled through the room. Then a firm voice from the back. Dr. Lang. "Let's not romanticize," he said. "I've seen the diagrams. They're suggestive. They are not formalized. They lack rigor. What we're discussing here is whether a man with no degree, no affiliation, and no peer-reviewed work should be named as co-author on a submission to the Journal of Modern Algebra." Professor Sinha added, "The journal has a strict authorship policy. Co-authors must be academically qualified." Berman nodded. "That's true. But there is precedent. Collaborative acknowledgments in special cases, recognition of original conceptual contribution, even from unaffiliated sources. At that moment, Bram spoke. "Permission to clarify," he said calmly. He stood, buttoned his blazer, and approached the board. "I want to state for the record that I have been working on similar structures since my time at ETH Zurich. My submitted paper, now under review, contains a variant of this same diagram. I did not copy Mr. Ward's drawings. Any similarities are coincidental, or perhaps indicative that we were both following similar lines of abstraction." Jacob clenched his jaw. "Bram," he said, "you were shown the diagrams. You saw them. You altered them. And now you're submitting your own version, without attribution." Bram smiled. "I refined them, with proper notation, with proof, with definitions. That is mathematics. What he drew was impressionistic, artistic, valuable, yes, but not rigorous." Professor Lang tapped his pen. "And here lies the issue. Do we reward intuition over structure, inspiration over formalism? Because if we do, we undermine everything this institution stands for." "But what if he saw something none of us did?" asked Dr. Voss, a quiet topologist from the second row. "What if, through instinct, through memory, he reached something we're only now putting words to?" Berman added, "The goal of mathematics is not to reward pedigree. It's to reveal structure. And Ellis Ward revealed something real." The room split, visibly. Half leaned forward, excited, inspired by the idea that a man who pushed a mop could also push the frontier of math. The other half leaned back, arms crossed, defending centuries of tradition. Then came the turn. Professor Sinha read aloud, "It has come to our attention that two submissions, one by Jacob Klein and one by Dr. Bram, contain overlapping content. Both intend to submit to the Journal of Modern Algebra. The editorial board must be notified if duplicate work is detected." Everyone turned to Bram. He raised both hands as if surrendering. "I submitted my manuscript 2 days ago. I did not know Klein was submitting. It's unfortunate timing." Jacob's voice was low but firm. "You waited until you had access to Ellis's notebooks, then submitted your version, stripped of his language, stripped of his meaning." Lang interrupted. "Even if that were true, does Mr. Ward's involvement make it publishable? That's the legal question here." "The legal question. The political question. Not the mathematical one." Professor Berman stepped back, weary. "Tonight is not about permission. It's about acknowledgement. If we ignore this, if we publish without crediting Ellis Ward, then we tell the world that ideas only matter when they come from those with titles." Silence followed. Then, quietly, a motion was made. It wasn't a vote, just a note. To allow Ellis Ward to be named as conceptual contributor on Jacob Klein's paper, with acknowledgement in the authorship block. Not as a full author, but not invisible either. Bram refused to amend his draft. "I will stand by my submission," he said coldly. "It contains nothing that does not meet the highest standards of mathematics." Berman looked at him and said, "Then let history decide whose standards matter more." The meeting ended without applause. No verdict, only a line drawn. One diagram, two paths, and a man not present, sweeping another hallway somewhere, unaware that a room of professors had just argued over the dust of his thinking. It was a quiet morning. Frost edged the windows of the graduate lounge, and the radiator clicked faintly in the corner. Jacob Klein sat at his desk, sipping black coffee, eyes heavy from rewriting the manuscript he and Ellis had worked on for weeks. The folder lay open beside him, titled simply, "Functor Shadows, Ward, Klein Draft 3. Inside, the diagrams were cleaner. The phrasing had been revised, but Ellis's handwriting still appeared in the margins. Small arrows, notes in pencil. At the bottom of page 12, next to a looping structure, Ellis had written, "If there's no path back, it was never truly a map." Beside it was his signature, scrawled quietly, E. Ward. At 11:43 a.m., Jacob left the room briefly to retrieve a book. Just 10 minutes. When he returned, the folder was gone. Gone. The room was empty. No one had entered. No sign of a break-in. He checked the wastebasket, the shelves, the printer tray. Nothing. His heart raced. He ran to the department office. "Has anyone been in the graduate lounge?" he asked breathlessly. The secretary looked confused. "No, not that I know of. Why?" "I left something. A draft. It's missing." She shook her head. "Sorry." Jacob filed an incident report. He notified Professor Berman. Then he waited. That evening, the storm arrived. Jacob was summoned to the dean's office. Inside sat the department chair, the graduate studies dean, and a silent administrative officer. The mood was cold, formal. The chair began, "Mr. Klein, we've received notice that unpublished academic material connected to your name has been circulated without proper clearance." Jacob blinked. "Circulated? What material?" The dean responded, "A draft titled Functor Shadows, bearing your name, is currently being reviewed by a third party. It does not appear to have been officially submitted through the university." Jacob stiffened. "That's because it was stolen. From my desk. This morning." The department chair's eyes narrowed. "And yet no lock was broken. No one else reported entry. It's your responsibility to secure unpublished research, especially when it involves external parties." Jacob froze. "Are you saying I leaked it?" The dean leaned forward. "At this moment, we are not accusing, but we are concerned. There is no legal documentation tying Mr. Ward, an unaffiliated staff member, to this work. Without such proof, the university cannot support any claim of joint authorship." Then came the sentence Jacob would never forget. "Until this is resolved, you are not to reference Mr. Ellis Ward in any formal academic setting. No citations, no acknowledgments, no public mention." Jacob felt the blood drain from his face. "He co-wrote that paper. I have scans. Notes. He signed it." The dean responded coolly. "We need notarized confirmation, witnessed by legal faculty. Otherwise, it is hearsay." The meeting ended. No resolution, no copy of the draft. No rights retained. Just a warning. Meanwhile, elsewhere on campus, Bram was preparing for Paris. The International Conference on Algebraic Structures was scheduled to take place in 2 weeks. Invitations had been sent. Abstracts had been finalized. Bram's paper was now titled Phantom Recursion and Functorial Looping in Topos Theoretic Spaces. It included several familiar diagrams, refined, cleaned, reworded, but unmistakably derived from Ellis's original thought. The structure was the same, the insights dressed in formal language, and there was no mention of Ellis Ward, no acknowledgement, no footnote, not even a nod to inspired ideas from informal conversations. The paper listed only one name, Dr. Leon Bram, Princeton University. Back in his dorm, Jacob paced. He pulled out Ellis's scanned notes, old diagrams, marginal comments, photos of chalkboards from Lecture Hall C5. He had backup, but no signature on the final version. Ellis had never signed a formal release. Only that quiet scrawl at the edge of page 12. Informal. Handwritten. In court, it would mean nothing. He visited Ellis that night. The old man sat quietly on a stool, sorting through a stack of aged graph paper. "They think I'm a ghost again," he said softly. "Not real enough to be mentioned." Jacob handed him a printed email. The Paris conference. Bram's abstract. Ellis read it without blinking. "They liked it then," he whispered. "They're taking it," Jacob answered, voice tight. "Without you." Ellis folded the paper. "Then I hope the math is good," Jacob snapped. "How can you be this calm? He took what we made." Ellis shrugged. "I didn't make it to keep. I made it so someone would see it, even if they never know it was mine." Jacob slumped into the chair. "They're threatening to suspend me unless I remove your name." Ellis paused. "Then remove it." "No," Jacob said. "No, I won't." Ellis looked him in the eye. "Then you may lose more than a paper." "I don't care." The next morning, something unexpected happened. A package arrived at the department office. No return address. Inside was a copy of the original manuscript, Jacob and Ellis's full draft, with annotations. The signature E. Ward was still there, but someone had added a typed statement at the end. This work was conceived in collaboration between J. Klein and E. Ward. All diagrams were drawn live by E. Ward between January and February 1991. Notes were reviewed jointly. I consent to authorship. It was printed and notarized by a retired librarian from the university archives, someone who had seen Ellis working at the blackboard for years. Jacob stared at the signature. It was real. He rushed to Berman's office. "We have proof." By afternoon, the tide began to turn. The university reversed its prior stance. Jacob's suspension was withdrawn. The paper, now officially titled Functor Shadows, a Study in Non-Classical Duality, was submitted to the Journal of Modern Algebra, co-authored by Jacob Klein and Ellis Ward. When the editorial board compared Bram's version to theirs, they saw the overlap and the timing. Bram was quietly asked to withdraw his paper from the Paris conference. He refused. So the conference committee issued an internal memo. While Dr. Bram will be allowed to present, it is noted that parallel work by Ward and Klein was received earlier by academic timestamp. Further citation required. In other words, you may speak, but everyone knows whose shadow you're walking in. That Sunday, Ellis didn't draw. He just sat with Jacob on the steps outside C5, watching the last snow melt in patches across the stone. Jacob handed him the final draft. "Your name's there." Ellis looked at it, nodded, then handed it back. "I don't need to hold it," he said. "It's enough to know it's seen." It started with a broken drawer. Ellis Ward had been looking for a folded coat, something heavy enough for March wind, when the back panel of his wooden desk collapsed. From inside the space behind it, a bundle of yellowed paper slipped out, bound in string, frayed at the edges. He didn't think much of it. Old notebooks, sketches from years past. But as he flipped through one, a date caught his eye. April 1977. Then a diagram. 3 spaces, 2 arrows, a loop. And beneath them, written in pencil, "If the pullback doesn't preserve co-limits, maybe the adjoint isn't symmetric, but its shadow should still preserve structure." Ellis stared at it, then traced the arrows with his finger. He remembered drawing it. Alone in the basement of the old library. He had read a short translated footnote from Grothendieck's work, something about adjoint functors, and had wondered then if a reflection could still preserve form without being formally reversible. He didn't know what it meant, not fully, but now he did. He handed the notebook to Jacob later that day. Jacob froze. His hands trembled as he read the note. "This," Jacob said. "This wasn't published anywhere until at least 1990. And even then, it was phrased differently. This is pure." He took a photo, then a scan, then brought it to Berman. The professor read the line 3 times, then slowly sat down. "We have to show this to the committee," Berman said. "Not the department. The university." The next week, a special hearing was convened. A panel of 5 faculty from different fields, 2 from math, 1 from philosophy of science, 1 from academic ethics, and 1 from Princeton's library archives. Jacob stood at the podium in a small lecture room. Behind him was projected the scanned notebook page, enlarged to fill the board. "Page 73, Jacob said. "Written in 1977. Stored privately in a desk Ellis Ward has used since 1981. No publication, no internet, no academic access. This line, this precise idea, matches a principle first formally defined in a 1990 article by Dwyer and Spolinsky on model categories." He paused. "Mr. Ward discovered it 13 years earlier. Alone." The room stayed silent. Then a professor from philosophy asked gently, "Can you confirm he understood what he had drawn?" Jacob answered, "Ellis never used formal terms, but his diagrams weren't abstract art. They're functional. His 1977 drawing is structurally equivalent to what we now call a derived adjoint, not in words, but in behavior. He didn't need the name to know how it worked." One of the math professors nodded slowly, but not all agreed. A knock interrupted the quiet. It was Bram. He stepped inside, uninvited but unchallenged. He walked toward the screen, holding a folder. "I'm sorry," he said, "but I think we're all forgetting something important." He opened the folder and removed a printed version of the same diagram, slightly refined. "This," Bram said, "could have been drawn by anyone, anytime. A triangle and a loop. It's suggestive, but it's not mathematics. It's metaphor." He turned to the ethics representative. "I could draw a similar diagram on a napkin and claim I imagined it 10 years ago. We're talking about assigning credit based on a pencil sketch, unverified for decades with no witnesses." Jacob bristled. "That's not what this is." Bram ignored him. "This is an emotional reaction to a romantic idea, a forgotten janitor, a lost genius. It's poetic, but it's not rigorous." Then he dropped the final blow. "And I've already consulted with a document specialist who says there's no reliable way to authenticate undated, unsigned pencil drawings. They can be fabricated, aged with heat, rebound. There are tools for this." The room tightened. The ethics professor asked, "Are you suggesting forgery?" Bram lifted his hands. "I'm saying, if you give this page legal weight, you set a precedent that anyone, any amateur, can write in a notebook and be retroactively awarded academic authorship over real published scholars." It was quiet. Very quiet. That night, Jacob sat with Ellis in the lecture hall, the room dark except for one flickering bulb. "I think they believed you," Jacob said. "But Bram's right. There's no legal proof." Ellis looked down at the scanned page. "I didn't draw it to be believed," he said. "I know." Ellis closed the notebook slowly. "But you do believe me?" Jacob nodded. I believe the pencil more than the printed article. Ellis smiled. Then it's already done. Jacob left the room. But the next morning, unexpected news arrived. The university librarian, Mrs. Edna Griffith, 82 years old, had requested to testify before the panel. She entered the meeting with a worn date log from the campus archive basement. I saw that notebook in 1978, she said. I was a junior archivist then. I remember because Mr. Ward used to sit in the corner table by the back heater. He would copy things, quietly. Never checked out a book, but he left this notebook behind one night. I saw that diagram, the triangle, the loop. I thought it was poetry. She smiled. But I remember that line. If there's no path back, it was never truly a map. I even wrote it down. She pulled a card from the file. Dated May 4th, 1978. Gasps filled the room. Real proof. Not a page, but a witness. A week later, the committee released its decision. The 1977 page would be accepted as conceptual precedent, not legally binding in ownership, but academically valid. Ellis Ward would be listed as first contributor in the official history of the concept, and Bram's paper, already under pressure, would be required to cite the 1977 drawing as an unpublished but originated model. In private, the journal editors sent Bram a letter. We advise withdrawal of your submission due to the failure to acknowledge prior foundational material. Bram never replied, but his paper disappeared quietly from the conference schedule. Jacob brought the news to Ellis the next morning. He handed him a letter from the archive board. It read, We recognize E. Ward's 1977 drawing as a legitimate pre-formal representation of a core algebraic idea. Your thinking shaped the map, and the map remains. Ellis didn't smile. He just whispered, Then someone, someday, might build on it. That's all I ever wanted. Jacob nodded. It was never about the paper, Ellis said. It was about not disappearing. The envelope arrived with no sound, slipped under Professor Berman's office door on a rainy Thursday morning. It bore the insignia of the Institut des Hautes Études Scientifiques, etched in deep indigo across ivory paper. The same institute where, decades earlier, Alexander Grothendieck had redrawn the landscape of modern mathematics, alone, intense, misunderstood. The return address read simply, IHS, Bure-sur-Yvette, France. Berman opened it slowly, his fingers trembling before the seal was even broken. Inside was a single-page letter, handwritten in crisp French, and translated into English on the back. To the authors of Functor Shadows, a study in non-classical duality, we write to express sincere admiration for the handwritten appendix authored by Mr. Ellis Ward, included in your manuscript. The clarity of categorical insight within his diagrams, particularly the recursive non-reversible loop systems, resonates strongly with the later unpublished notebooks of Alexander Grothendieck held in our private archives. In particular, one construction, a sequence of mappings that refuse to collapse under classical duality, matches an open structure Grothendieck once labeled non-reflexive descent. We are astonished by the parallel. Whoever Mr. Ward is, he has seen something real. With respect, Dr. Henri Volcaire, archiviste, IHES Berman, read it 3 times. Then he forwarded it to the editorial board of the Journal of Modern Algebra. By noon, word had spread through the faculty halls like wind through dry leaves. The next day, a meeting of the editorial board was called. 5 senior editors from the journal gathered remotely via video conference. On one screen, the latest version of Jacob and Ellis's manuscript, now with the Paris letter included as an appendix. On the other, a file of scanned diagrams, signed in pencil, E. Ward. One editor leaned forward. "This is the most original categorical insight we've reviewed in the last 5 years," she said. Another added, "The handwritten appendix is not just stylistic, it's foundational. This man, this Ward, thinks like the early pioneers. There's an internal logic that defies formal training." But then came the pause. "And yet, we cannot verify who Ellis Ward is. He has no academic record, no CV, no published work. We don't even know if he's still employed at Princeton. Can we publish a paper with a named contributor whose very identity may be challenged?" The board discussed for hours. Finally, they agreed. Yes, on one condition. Ellis Ward must be verified as a real person, alive, and the originator of the material. No ghost authors, no romantic fictions. A formal letter was sent to Jacob that evening. "We are prepared to publish your submission in full, with acknowledgement of Mr. Ellis Ward as conceptual contributor and co-author of Appendix A, provided formal identification and institutional verification are received within 7 days." But not everyone welcomed the decision. Dr. Bram submitted a formal petition of protest to the editorial board, titled, "On the Inclusion of Uncredentialed Individuals in Formal Mathematical Publication." In it, he argued that allowing non-degreed individuals to appear as authors erodes the academic credibility of the journal, that the handwritten appendix lacks standardized notation and may have been retrospectively influenced by others, that no public talk, lecture, or peer-reviewed material could be cited under Ellis Ward's name, that including such a name would invite ridicule from the wider research community. His final sentence read, "To include the name of a janitor, whose work cannot be reviewed under formal standards, would diminish not only this article but the very process of mathematical publication." Jacob read it in stunned silence. Ellis, however, barely reacted. "I've been left off worse lists," he said softly. But then something unexpected happened. A letter arrived. Again, from France. This time, not from the archives, but from Professor Claude Février, a retired mathematician who had once studied under Grothendieck himself. It read, "To whom it may concern, I have reviewed the diagrams attributed to Mr. Ellis Ward, particularly those in Appendix A of the submitted paper. I was present at a private Grothendieck seminar in 1971, where a similar mapping, non-dual, looped through an invisible transformation, was discussed but never formalized. Ward's version corrects something even Grothendieck left open: the failure of symmetrical return under categorical descent. That particular insight, captured in one of Ward's hand-drawn diagrams, is not only original, it is precise. No amateur forger could have drawn it. It is not imitation. It is understanding. Sincerely, Professor Claude Février, former chair, Topos Theory Group, École Normale Supérieure." The statement broke the stalemate. The editorial board reconvened. Bram's petition was quietly dismissed. Behind closed doors, the journal made its ruling. The paper, Functor Shadows, a study in non-classical duality, is accepted for publication, with full credit to Jacob Klein and Ellis Ward. The appendix by Ellis Ward is to be preserved in its original handwriting, accompanied by scanned copies of his diagrams. Bram's paper, submitted in parallel, will be marked as under re-review for potential ethics violation pending further investigation. That investigation did not take long. Within a week, internal emails surfaced, messages between Bram and his student Nathan, discussing the structure of Ward's diagrams before Bram's version had even been written. Screenshots were archived, files time-stamped. Bram had lied. The university's ethics committee issued a formal notice of misconduct. Though no public statement was made, Bram quietly withdrew from all upcoming conferences. His Paris talk was canceled. 1 week later, a final letter arrived. Hand-delivered. This time, to Ellis's dorm. It was signed by the director of IHAS. Mr. Ellis Ward, it would be our honor to invite you to visit our institute in Bure-sur-Yvette as a guest observer. Your diagrams have sparked conversations in our seminars. Should you wish, we will host a private discussion of your appendix this fall among peers who still believe mathematics can be born from silence. With deep respect, Dr. Simone Duray, Director, IHS Ellis, stared at the envelope. He ran his fingers along the edge, then placed it gently on the windowsill. That Sunday, he met Jacob at Lecture Hall C5. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He handed Jacob a small, fresh notebook. On the first page, he'd written, "Some shadows don't need to disappear. They just need someone to stand still long enough to see them." And beneath it, E. Ward. It was late spring when the invitation came. A letter, stamped in dark blue, embossed with the seal of the International Congress of Mathematicians. Inside, the words were formal, but Jacob read them with a kind of quiet disbelief. "We are pleased to invite you to present your work on non-classical duality at the upcoming ICM session in Paris. Your paper, co-authored with Mr. Ellis Ward, has sparked international interest in phantom recursion theory. We invite both authors to attend and speak." At the bottom, it read, "Presenters, J. Klein and E. Ward." Jacob folded the letter slowly. His name was there. But it was Ellis's name that meant everything. That evening, he knocked on the familiar door at the edge of the maintenance wing. The light inside flickered faintly, and a kettle steamed on the hot plate near the window. Ellis opened the door as if he'd been expecting him. "You got it, didn't you?" Jacob said. Ellis just nodded, then sat down slowly on the edge of the bed. "They want us both," Jacob said. "Paris. The same hall Grothendieck once stood in." Ellis didn't answer. After a long silence, he finally said, "I won't go." Jacob froze. "You won't... what?" Ellis's eyes didn't rise. "It's your paper now, your voice. You carry it." Jacob stepped forward. "You're on the cover. They wrote your name first." "I know," Ellis said gently. "And now it belongs to the world." Jacob's voice broke. "You've earned this moment. 100 times over." But Ellis only smiled, tired. "Recognition doesn't feed what I'm hungry for." 3 days later, Ellis was gone. No goodbye. No letter. Only a note taped to the inside of the chalk cabinet in Lecture Hall C5. "Math is not a podium. It's a lamp in the dark. If anyone asks, tell them I went home." And beneath it, the familiar initials, E. Ward. He had taken the late bus, the one no one used in spring, heading west toward Kansas, toward a town whose name few remembered, where dirt roads still cracked under winter snow and the library opened only 3 days a week. There, in a church basement with no insulation and peeling linoleum, Ellis Ward unlocked the back door and turned on a single bulb. He cleared a row of folding chairs, unfolded a whiteboard, and opened his notebook. It started with 4 children, 2 whose parents worked at the feed mill, 1 who delivered groceries on a rusted bicycle, and 1 girl who refused to speak, but carried a tattered algebra book in her backpack like a prayer. They sat quietly on folding chairs as Ellis drew a triangle on the board. "This," he said, "is a map, not to a place, but to an idea." He paused. Some ideas don't move in straight lines. They come back around. No one interrupted. No one questioned his title. No one asked for his diploma. They just watched the arrows form, slowly, gently, like something unfolding from the center of the world. Back at Princeton, the day of the Paris talk arrived. Jacob stood alone on the stage of the Palais des Congrès, heart racing, palms cold. He looked down at the printed schedule. 2 names still listed: J. Klein and E. Ward. He stepped to the microphone, took a breath, and began. This paper was born on a blackboard in a quiet lecture hall, drawn not by a professor, but by the man who swept the floor at night. He didn't ask for credit. He didn't ask to be published. He just drew what he saw. His name is Ellis Ward, and today I stand in the light of what he saw first. The room was silent. Then a soft, slow ripple of applause began, gentle, respectful, like something sacred had passed through the room. In Kansas, snow began to fall. Ellis stood at the window of the basement, chalk in hand, listening to the children behind him, scribbling out shapes, debating quietly whether a path could fold inward without breaking. He smiled. He didn't need Paris. He didn't need applause. He had what he came for. 4 minds, awake, and the sound of math being passed, hand to hand, in the simplest way it ever could be. From one person who had seen something real to someone who was learning to see it too.